right, I think we'll get started. People might keep trickling in, but welcome everybody, for those of you that are here. My name is Liana, and I am a job hunting data scientist, and I've created this group for us all to collaborate with our interview prep and our job hunting. My background is in music. I was a professional pianist and educator, and I also have a background in mathematics. So that's just a quick little bit about me. But let's get started. So for those of you who are new to this group, joining for the first time, I'll just run through. If you were here last week, you've heard this spiel before. But this group is specifically for anyone who is job hunting, looking for a job, and preparing for the arduous on-site technical interview. It's a space to practice interview style questions as a group together. And my main focus here is to simulate the real interview experience. And a couple of ways that we do that is one, by having it timed. So in a 45-minute session, we're going to cover 3 questions. And the reason why I'm choosing 3 questions is because typically a real interview is going to be about 45 minutes in length. An interviewer doesn't have time to spend more than 15 minutes on a question. So we need to practice being able to get to a solution and answer quite quickly. So it gives us a chance together as a group to feel out what does 15 minutes actually feel like to get to a solution. And then another thing that's different to studying on your own at home is speaking out loud. We can often answer a question when we're coding it out and, you know, in our own little world, and we have infinite time, but when we're actually asked to put our solutions into words, it's a completely different skill set and a completely different experience. So I really encourage, as we go through these questions, pretend that I'm the interviewer. You know, use it as a chance to practice your delivery and how you would answer a question in an interview. I really want that this session to be focused on preparing for real interviews. So don't be scared to speak up. I really want to hear from you. And while I'm obviously not the real interviewer, I have curated these questions, so I do know the solutions. So if I try and probe you, I want to try and simulate that experience of the interviewer. I'm going to press on the hows and the whys. So try and challenge yourself to dive deeper on those hows and whys. This session is not a lecture. We don't deep dive into topics. If you are interested in deep diving into topics, I really recommend the Deep Learning Adventures group, which George Zotto and actually Robert is here. I just noticed is here as well. Hey, Robert. Those guys lead that session, mostly Wednesdays and Fridays, sometimes twice a week, sometimes once a week, but I really recommend jumping on meetups.com and go to Deep Learning Adventures because they do deep dives. They cover a variety of topics in machine learning, deep learning, data science, cover tutorials, all that kind of thing. So this is not what this session is. This is a very hands-on, practical-based session about answering questions and hearing multiple solutions as a group. Okay, so plenty of meetups for deep dives, not this one, if that's what you're here for. Okay, as I mentioned, we're trying to cover a variety of questions that could be asked in data-related interviews. So it could be data science, data engineering, a data analyst, business intelligence. So if you're going for a data science interview, the questions might be more machine learning, statistics heavy. If you're going for an engineering role, maybe they're going to be more heavy on SQL and Python. So I'm trying to cover a variety of topics that are going to relate to most of these career paths, whichever one you're in. And then this group is also a space for shared misery. Job hunting sucks. So share your tips, share what you're going through. Everyone wants study tips and how to move forward in job hunting. So this is a space to share that. And while I have that, I'll share in the chat a link for, where's my chat box gone? Here it is. I'm going to share a link in the chat for our Slack group. And you can join along in our Slack group. In the Slack group, I'm going to post all the solutions from the session, as well as study tips that people might have. So join along in the Slack group. And I also will share slides and resources and hopefully recordings. I'm recording today's session. So there is the, oh, I've just had someone's waiting to come in. Sorry guys, quick pause. Oh, I see, sorry. Sorry, George. George has been trying to get in. Okay. All right. Sorry, George, to keep you waiting. Okay, so let me run through the format of these sessions with you. For 15 minutes, we'll do this kind of thing, intros, announcements, if anything has anything to say. But then 3:15 to 4 is going to be focused on answering questions specifically. We're going to spend 15 minutes per question. Roughly, I'm going to give you 5, depending on the question, 3 to 5 minutes to answer on your own. So you have an opportunity to actually answer the question yourself. And then the remaining 10 minutes, we're going to discuss as a group. And just in the interest of time, I might cut group discussions just so we can actually get to a solution and see the solution. It's very easy to, these discussions to go a long time. So don't mean to be rude if I cut someone off. So 45 minutes of questions. And then at the end, 4 to 4:30 is just going to be open discussion. So if there is a challenging question that we want to circle back to and you want to ask more about, we can discuss more. You can share your interview experience, discuss study tips, that kind of thing, or give me feedback, which I always enjoy. And I also just want to say for those who've recently joined, if you can just write in the chat box, whether you're Central Time, Eastern Time, or Pacific Time. I'm just trying to get a gauge on what a good time for these sessions is based on people's location. I feel like I might be the only one on the West Coast, but we'll see, except for Alana. All right. So a couple of resources to start with. I recommend opening up a Google Colab notebook or a Jupyter notebook just to have either take notes in markdown cells or to code out solutions if you're doing a coding problem. A little shameless self-promotion. I did write a 3-part blog series on interview prep because I have a little bit of a quirk with study preparation and making that an efficient process. So feel free to check that out. And of course, I have a link to the Slack channel here. Again, I'll share these slides, so all these links will be available to you. And then these are the topics that we're going to be covering each week. So I'm going to pick 3 of these topics each week and try and keep a bit of a rotation so that we cover a good variety of topics. Does anyone have any questions, comments, concerns at this point? Okay, well, obviously let me know if you do. Only other thing that I'll say is keep yourself muted while we're, obviously talk if I'm talking or introducing a question, but otherwise please feel free to unmute yourself if you want to chime in with answers and solutions to the problems. Okay, so today's topics, we're going to be covering sort of an easy, nice sort of, I like to start with a nice simple coding one that is a statistics question. A nice easy statistics question. This isn't necessarily going to be one you would see on an on-site interview, but it's something that you might see in a coding challenge and a code screening phase of an interview. And it's going to be on HackerRank, so I will share the link with you as well. The main reason for this question today is that sometimes the HackerRank platform can be a bit confusing if you haven't come across it before. So we'll talk about how to sort of debug in that HackerRank world. And also it's a good warm up to get your logic mind thinking. So we'll start with that. And then Svetlana has been really generous to offer up a question today, and she's going to be introducing a modeling and metrics question. So she'll be doing question number 2. I'll hand over to Svetlana. And then we're also going to do a business and product sense question as our third question. Please ignore my Slack notifications in the background. Okay. All right, question 1, straight into it. Given an array X of n integers, calculate and print the mean and mode of X. If your array contains more than one modal value, choose the numerically smallest one. So mean and mode being most frequent, mean, I think we're all familiar with mean. The input of this format, which we'll see in HackerRank soon, we have the first line contains the integer denoting the number of elements in the array. The second line contains the integers themselves in space-separated integers. Okay, now I want you to do this solution without using NumPy. Obviously, NumPy has a mean function and SciPy has a mode function, but this is about actually understanding the algorithm yourself. So here's sample input for you. You get line number 1 with the number of elements in the item, and line number 2 is the numbers themselves. So I will open up our HackerRank. Let me make sure I don't have a solution in here already. Just delete that out. So I will share this in the Slack with you. This, sorry, in the chat. This has, where's my chat box? Sorry, guys. Sorry, guys. Just looking for my chat box. Okay, here's the HackerRank link. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to work on this yourself, get a solution. It asks you to also do the median, but we're going to skip median today just for sake of time. Mean's a nice sort of simple solution, and the mode is a little more interesting. So if you want to code out in the coding block in the link I just sent in chat for mean and mode. So I'll give you 3 minutes and then we'll come back together and share a solution. And if anyone isn't on HackerRank, I'll scroll up for you so you can see the question again. You can use Python's standard functions, just no NumPy functions. Okay, how we doing? Does that was about just under 3 minutes. anyone get a full solution that they would like to share? Does anybody have any upfront comments, thoughts, or concerns upfront?
Now I'm working on a median.
You're working on the median?
Yeah, I'm finished on mod and the median.
I also want to preface and say that there are obviously multiple ways to do these problems. Some are better than others, but let's just share any of our solutions that we have. Does anybody want to share what the first thing we have to do, and this is to do with this HackerRank format that we're in, what's the first thing that we have to do to be able to get anything to work in this code block that we've got? Let's start with the mean. So if we think about the mean, what's our formula that we need for mean? Let's just sort of get that out.
The sum of all the elements. Should I just say it like out loud? Okay, the sum of all the elements divided by the count of the elements in the list. Let's say.
Yeah.
I created it just like a random list.
Yep. Beautiful. So that's our formula. So in this environment, HackerRank tells us, enter your code here, read input from stdin, print output to stdout. Is anyone familiar with that in what we have to do?
Yeah, input function.
Right. And so, yeah, can you elaborate on how we can get access to our data to be able to test our function?
Okay, maybe I can tell you my code.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay, so define a variable, any variable, then equal list. Then we go to mapping, map, then int, comma, input, then dot split by space. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, and can you explain a little more about what's going on here?
Basically the input is in the type of string, right? Any input. Yep. So, and I see the format is the element of the arrays are entered in a space, right? The first element, second element in one line.
Yep.
So we have one string. So we need to split the string. The delimiter is a space.
Yep.
Then definitely the output of the split function is a list.
Mm-hmm.
Now still every element is in a string type.
Yep.
So we need to convert from a string to int. Mm-hmm. So the map will do that.
Perfect. And so why do you need to put this list wrapping on the outside?
Yeah, you are right. It's optional, of course. But the next step is we need to sum up, right?
Yes. Just to circle back, this list actually isn't optional.
Okay.
It's actually required. If we left this out, in fact, we can try it.
A map object.
Yes, it's going to be, and just for everyone else to see, this is part of the debugging in HackerRank. We have to get something out, and then we have to just use print statements to see what things deliver. So if we run this code now and see, it's going to tell us that we got the question wrong, obviously, but it'll give us our output. It just gives us a map object. So for those of you who haven't come across that before, the list part is actually very important. We are essentially, if we come back to our sample input, we're converting this down here into a list. And like you just mentioned, the input function makes everything a string. It's a type of string. So we have to convert everything in our list. We first have to split it on, we said it was space separated, so splitting it on spaces. Then we have to turn it into an integer rather than a string. And then we're going to create it into a list rather than a map object. So
yeah. But your next, you are right, but your next step matters. For instance, if you are, how do you sum up? if you are using the sum function, like you said,
Yep.
the input to the sum function will not be iterable. So map object is iterable if you are summing each element without using the sum function, for example. So you don't need to use it to use the list. You can iterate. You can access the element of map object.
Perfect. Awesome. So what was the next part? If we're going to do mean, what was the next line of your solution?
Yeah, mean is equal to sum of x over len of x.
Over what did you say? Sorry.
Divide by len, L-E-N. That's the length of. Okay, that's the mean.
Awesome. All right. Well, shall we try to? Let's see if we've gotten the mean right. So run this. Okay. So our output was 10. They're expecting this to be, this is the mean of the list that they've given us. And our output was 10, and we're expected to get 43,900.
Is that because objects there?
Sorry, say again, Amanda.
It looks like there's 2 string objects, right? So it just took that first line, which is just 10, and it computed everything from that.
Right.
That's what it, yeah.
Exactly. So is everyone here familiar with the input function? Yeah, so input, like we mentioned, is list. If we just do a quick experiment, and if we just print input, this is where HackerRank is essentially giving us our data. So if we print input once, and we run that, it's going to output 10. So it's essentially outputting the first line. If we try...
Oh, yeah. Okay.
If we try printing input a second time,
yeah,
we get the list.
Yeah. So
all of this was correct, just so everyone knows this is absolutely correct. We just have to adjust that ordering. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. We need to have, I think the first, we have to input the number of the elements, I think. N is equal to input. Int, yeah.
Sorry, thanks.
Yeah, so int.
Okay, so that'll give us the first line, 10. That'll give us N, the number of objects in the list. What do I do second?
And that's it.
Yeah.
We can check the mean.
Exactly. So the first time input's run, it's going to give us the top number 10, and then we're calling it again down here when we define X. So now we should be good, right? So let's see if our mean is now correct. And in fact, we could actually change len to just N.
Yeah, sure.
We've established that now. So we'll run this, see how we're going. Yay, so we've got our mean correct. So again, for the sake of time, we're going to skip over median, and I want to jump to mode. Does anyone want to share their solution for mode, or at least get us started?
Yeah, I can proceed if there is someone I can give a chance.
Yeah, please don't be shy. It doesn't have to be a complete solution, just get it started. Or even just talk, you don't even have to give code, just talk through the logic.
I would probably like go through the elements in the list and build up a count of each like element. So like say you have element 1 or element 0 or whatever, you check is the next element, is this element equal to the current like mean, which is, mode, which is like 0 or something. If it's, okay, if it is, then add a count incremented by 1. If it's not, then I guess you would set the count of it to be 1.
Right, exactly. So what you're describing is I guess if we thought of it as like a frequency table where we're trying to count the frequency of each item. That's what you've just described. So what's the data structure that we could use to store our frequency counts?
If you're going to go through the list, you could use, you could store it. Basically keep the count in a map, it's not called a map in Python.
Dictionary?
A dictionary. And so the number would be the index, and then the count would be the value.
Right. Perfect. All right. So maybe we'll establish a frequency dictionary. Seems to be consensus. We want to create a frequency dictionary to keep track of how many times they appear in our list. So if I create this empty dictionary, does anyone want to chime in with how I'm going to build this dictionary? Remember, we have access to X, our array. So we do have this now in a list form of integers. So they are integers and it is a list.
I was suggesting a for loop where you'd have like for, E in X.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for num in X.
Yep.
There's and so you just, you have to know if the value's already there. I think you need an if to check if it's there or not.
Yeah.
Basically, you want to add one to the value of that element.
Yep. So if num in freak, is this what you're thinking?
Yeah, if num in freak dict sub num plus equals 1.
Mm-hmm.
Else freak dict num equals 0. Equals 1.
You say equals 1?
Yeah. Because that's the first time you've seen it.
Yep. Anyone else want to chime in on that front?
Actually, a somewhat more compact way that you can do this using the dictionary.get function.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh, yeah.
you can get rid of the conditional statement and alternatively do freak dict index to num is equal to freak dict dot get of num comma 0 is the default. So like if it doesn't find it in the dictionary, use default and then add 1 as Liana just typed.
Beautiful. So again, 2 solutions.
And actually there's a third way of doing this, which might even be better for folks. If you know about the standard library in Python called collections, mm-hmm. You can just from collections import counter with a capital C.
Oh, thank you.
And then you can just say freak dict equals counter of X, and that does everything for you as far as this pre-processing step.
Beautiful.
So just another little bit shorter way of doing it. It can be nice to build it up the first way though, because that really forces you to understand exactly what's going on.
Yeah, agreed. And exact reason why I love to have a study group, because now we have 3 solutions. And so, like Robert just said, in an interview context, if you were to get a question like this, what's the interviewer want to know? They want to know, do you understand the logic? Essentially, you've already won the question once you've established that you need to establish some sort of frequency count. That's essentially the first step in this question. So whichever solution you get to, I think especially for data scientists, we're not software engineers. They care more about, do we understand the conceptual side of things? And obviously chime in if you disagree with that, but that's my thoughts on that one. So we've got a bunch of different solutions here. I'm gonna pick this one just because I don't want to rely on knowledge of packages, even though this is a nice solution. So I'm going to keep those so that I'll share all this code later so you can all see this, all three solutions. Let's pick this one. So if we go back to the rest of the solution, we've got our frequency dictionary now. We've counted it, we've gone through, we've checked. We're going to get the key. If the key isn't there, we're going to add 0. If the key is there, it's going to be 0, and we're going to keep adding 1. So what's the next step in determining what our mode is? And remember, the question said if there are multiple modes, winners, we're going to choose the smallest number.
You need to know which of the, you have a bunch of key value pairs. You need to know the maximum of the values, and there might be more than one key that has that same maximum value.
Okay.
Wait, sorry, this is the mode is the greatest number. So then you would pick, so you need the maximum of the values and then the minimum of the key.
Right. Okay, so we've got this sort of two-step process. So how would we go about, what would be the best way to code out finding the max in the values? We'll say,
this iterate.
what was that, sorry?
Yeah, and I'm suggesting the solution. I was suggesting the solution, but you are good. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to let you. If I'll just create a variable called max frequency. That is the maximum frequency value that we find. What do I code here?
Could you first make oh wait, never mind. You could do max parentheses freak _ dict dot values. I don't know if that's the right format.
Yeah,
maybe not.
That'll work. Definitely. I don't have any issues with that. Does anyone else have another solution of getting max values? This is one. This will definitely work. I always like to hear Robert's solutions.
I think I did the same, but put it in a list comprehension.
Okay.
Kind of combined your 2 steps in one line.
Cool. Do you want to share that?
Sure.
Do you mean the 2 steps as in to get the max and the min?
Well, actually, just from the freak dict computed the mode in one line from a list comprehension.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Do you want to share that one out? I'll create it.
I could paste the line into the Slack chat, I guess, and then we can go through it.
Awesome.
And I think that I'm using C was my counter, so that's freak dict.
Okay. That's freak dict.
Right.
Okay. And so this is our, is this the,
I think that's right.
cool.
But this is really doing 3 steps in one line. But that's,
Yeah.
list comprehensions sometimes make things more readable, sometimes not. Sometimes in the eye of the beholder, I guess.
Okay, I like this. I mean, okay, let's go. Actually, we're time's going. So let's finish this solution off where we've established, just to go through the flow. We want to get our frequency dictionary, then we want to find the max value, and then we want to find the minimum value out of all of the keys. So in that scenario, does anyone have a solution of what they did to find the min in the key values? I guess maybe a dirty or messy way you could do it is to create, and this again, ties into the ease of Robert's solution. You could create mode potential, a list of mode potentials, and do another for loop. Go through all the keys, and then if that key is equal to our max freq number, which we established above, then we could append that number to our mode potentials. So that's kind of the very long-winded coding out the steps, and then your mode is going to be the minimum of all of those mode potentials. Right, so that's kind of the flow, essentially, that you're seeing. You're trying to find the max value and then establish what is the minimum out of all of the keys in that. So this essentially summarizes everything we did above.
Right, rather than computing the min as you just typed, I instead sorted and then just took the first element from the sort.
Beautiful.
So one thing I realized after finishing this, which is kind of an important thing that I neglected, is that usually these problems have constraints, and sometimes you want to make sure that your code is robust to be able to not kick out an error if the list is empty.
Yeah.
And in this case, it turns out that if you read up, I think it says that the list has at least 10 elements.
It does. It does give you constraints, yeah.
But sometimes it's really important to keep those constraints in mind when building your solution.
Yep. And that's a really good point, especially for these coding challenges that you come across. Awesome.
Sometimes it's just as simple as like returning a trivial value quickly if the input array is empty and then doing the calculation.
Yeah.
Other times it totally informs what algorithm you choose depending on how big the array is you're trying to process.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, also sometimes they don't allow you to use extra memory. And sometimes the order of operations, I mean, the complexity of computation is important.
Yep.
In this case, if you are doing sorting, then you just need to find the minimum. Finding the minimum is O of n operations, but sorting is O of n log n or more. So you may want to avoid sorting when it's not necessary.
Yep. And definitely a consideration for data people too, if we're in the big data world, is if we have to deal with this on a really, really large scale, these solutions don't become practical anyway, and then you might want to start looking at heaps, and your data structure knowledge is going to kick in at that point. So if I can ask if Robert and Svetlana, if you want to comment and chat about some of those things you just mentioned so that people can follow up after, that would be really helpful. And also I'll put in for the test case, HackerRank does let you write your own test input. If you want to test some of those edge cases rather than just use their one that they give you, you can test against your own custom input. So we did get the question right, even though it says we got it wrong. We didn't do the median. I encourage you to go back and do the median. It's a fun one too. I'm going to turn back because I want to hand over to Svetlana. But just takeaways on this one. Understand HackerRank's code challenge, the way that they provide the input. So just get familiar with the debugging style of that HackerRank style format, using print statements to figuring out how things are working, what your input data actually is. And then for these types of algorithm problems, they want to know you know, do you know how the algorithm works of mean, median, mode, rather than can you just implement, you know, an existing package or function. And then think about your data structures that you're going to use, whether it's going to be lists, dictionaries, heaps, are you going to use mapping functions, that kind of stuff. That can always help to simplify the problem as well. And then I have provided a couple of documentations for NumPy and SciPy's versions of these functions. And there's documentation for Python's input function there as well, if you haven't come across that function before. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Svetlana now. Svetlana, do you want me to just click? Oh, sorry, I've got a question. Yes. Jeff.
Just quick question. I'm not familiar with HackerRank. How did you get to the workspace that the interactive workspace that you were using?
Oh, let me, it was, did the link that I sent in chat, did it work? Did it take you to this page?
Yes.
So the workspace was scrolling, I just scrolled down and it was at the bottom. Do you have that available to you?
Maybe I just didn't go far enough.
There is a little ad in the meantime. So
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
And also, how do you actually print the two outputs? Because I think I tried printing mean and then printing mode, but it only printed one of them.
Oh, really? Okay. It should work if it asks you in the instructions to just have repeated print statements for mean, median, and mode. So if I run mode on this one, I get the 2. So the print, it'll print out anything in your print statement.
Okay, I think I just printed something else instead.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm gonna move on. I've gone over a little bit. I'm gonna move on and hand the floor over to Svetlana, and she's going to present us with this modeling and metrics problem.
Thank you, Lena, very much. So here we have a problem where a data scientist is evaluating different binary classification models. Everybody knows what a binary classification model is? So your target is a categorical variable with exactly two categories. And so one of the categories is considered positive and the other negative. And the false positive means that we are predicting positive when actually the expected result is negative. So false positive result is 5 times more expensive than a false negative result. And they want us to evaluate models based on these 3 criteria. And so the first one is about recall rate of at least 80%, then false positive rate should be 10% or less, and they want to minimize business costs. And here we're given those examples of confusion matrices. Everybody knows what a confusion matrix is? Yes? That's where, yeah, it's a 2x2 matrix where you have predicted versus observed values of the target variable. And so here we have A, B, C, D, 4 different confusion matrices. And Tn stands for true negative, Fp is false positive, etc. And they want us to evaluate those matrices and decide and pick the best model based on these criteria. And this question came from a sample test for Amazon certification, but it has, there is nothing about Amazon here.
I'll just chime in and say, have take 2 minutes, everyone, to answer on your own, and all write down some of your notes, and we'll reveal some hints as well for calculating the metrics. So take a couple of minutes. Thank you, Svetlana. to reveal a little hint.
Oh.
Oh, everybody computed recall? How about business cost? I like that the numbers are very convenient for computing.
Sorry, could you go back to the question, like what's the recall threshold? Oh, sorry.
I'll put this here. It's got the answers and the requirements on both sides. And Svetlana, whenever you want to talk through, just go for this, your time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, do you want me to show the solutions? So we are computing the recall rate. And for recall, the denominator is TP plus Fn, which happens to be 100 for all those cases, because it's actually the number of positives that were in the original set. And so the recall is, for the first model, is 0.78, for the second is 0.79, but they asked us to have at least 80%. So here we had 78 and 79%, not enough. And then for the last two, it's 90% and 82%, so those are good. And now we need to minimize business costs. Yeah, the false positive rate of 10% or less, actually it's always less here. The maximum was 9%, so it's good. And to minimize the business cost, we have to compute the business cost. I only computed for the last two because the first two failed the other criterion. And the cost is, as I said, 5 times the false positive. So we take 5 times false positive plus false negative. So here we get 30 times some constant, positive constant x. And in the last one, we get 28. So the last model, even though it seems maybe not as good as the other one, but actually for this business, it makes more sense to use the last one because the cost is lower. Any questions on that?
I missed, how did you calculate the false positive rate?
The false positive is given, it's FP.
So all of the ones shown they satisfy the false positive requirement, right?
Correct.
So it's the number of false positives over the total number of positives.
No, FP is a false positive, so I don't think you need to divide by anything.
Well, I think it's FP divided by the sum of FP plus TN. It's like the fraction.
Okay, well. So FP divided by what? FP?
Negative. It's the fraction of true negatives that are misclassified as positives. Or it's the fraction of ground truth negatives that are misclassified as positives. So the TNs and the FPs are ground truth negative. And so the false positive rate in in solution D is 2 divided by 98 plus 2, or 2 divided by 100.
Yeah, fortunately we have this 100 in the denominator here, so we get the same as just FP.
Yeah, it makes it easy to do without having to compute anything.
Yeah. But in general, yes, that should be considered as well. And then the costs, for the costs, the problem said that the cost of false positive was 5 times more than the cost of false negative. And so if the cost of false negative is X, then the cost of false positive would be 5X. And so total we get 20, for number C, we'll get 20X plus 10X. So we'll get 30X. And for D, we will get 28. Because here false positive is low, which is good. Because it's multiplied by 5, so.
So Svetlana, would you say if you were to get this question in a view, do you think cases could be made for choosing either of these solutions, or do you think D is the hard solution in this scenario?
Well, you see, we were given this criteria, and by this criteria, definitely we need to pick D.
Cool. And I guess that's because they've made the case that you have to minimize the business costs.
Yeah, so they said that, okay, as long as these other things are within those specs, we want to minimize the cost, which makes sense. Now, if you guys want, guys and girls, we could discuss what models we could use for binary classification. Anybody can tell me what models you could use for binary classification?
Logistic regression.
Yes. What else?
Yeah, you can also use naive Bayes or a random
Yes.
forest or almost any
Right.
classification model would work.
Yeah, SVM.
Sorry?
LDA.
SVM.
SVM, yes. What else?
XGBoost.
Sorry?
XGBoost.
XGBoost, yes. Good. Okay. Yeah, very good. What else is there? Decision tree, which is random forest. Neural networks. Yeah, you can use any model. A nearest neighbor. Yeah. Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Svetlana. And I don't know if you want to chime in any more here, but just some takeaways from that question is being able to identify trade-offs in those sort of business model questions, being able to translate from, yep, you've set up a binary classification model. Can you translate that to a business understanding and business costs? Do you understand confusion matrices? Do you understand recall and precision? So I always recommend when you're studying questions, think about, why am I being asked this question? What am I being tested, so to speak? What is it that they're trying to test my knowledge on? Would you say there are any other takeaways in that, Svetlana, that from that problem?
No, I think that's good.
Awesome. So as Svetlana said, that was a question from the AWS machine learning exam. So you can do AWS certifications, and there are sample exams on their website. So there's a link here to this particular exam. It was question number 5. And there's also a link to some more in precision and recall if you want to research a little more about that. I'm going to move on to question number 3, unless anyone else has any other questions on that one.
Sorry, so in the confusion matrix, what is the like total relationship among the 4 amounts?
Svetlana, do you want to answer that, Svetlana?
What do you mean relationship? You just count how many times you encounter cases that are correctly classified, and so how many cases you have where your true answer was 1 and you got 0, and how many cases where you correctly got 1, etc.
Oh, okay.
That's your count.
So all of the like all of the 4 quantities together will be the total number of cases?
Exactly,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Well, unless you have weight, case weight, then frequency weight, then the total would be the total frequency weight.
Okay. Thanks.
We'll post some more resources in the Slack channel about confusion matrices and whatnot if you want to read up a little more there too as well. Okay, question number 3 is a business product sense question. This is a deliberately vague question. How would you measure the success of Facebook groups? So again, I want you to think about why you're being asked this question. Something that would come up probably more in a business intelligence role, business analyst, but I would argue a data scientist just generally need to be aware of product and business sense. So take a couple of minutes. We're not going to get to a hard and fast solution. This is going to be a discussion type question. So I'm going to give you just 1 minute because I want to mostly discuss as a group. 1 minute to write down your initial thoughts as how you might tackle such a vague question. So we'll reconvene shortly. Have a think. Okay, does anyone want to kick us off? You've just been asked this question. What's the first thing you do?
So first I want to clarify. I'm going to be asking a bunch of clarifying questions. Like, are we talking about just each individual group and how successful those are? Are we talking about individual classes of specific groups, like your political interest groups, your friend groups, your family groups, whatever? Or are we talking about groups overall as a whole?
Awesome. First tip for clarifying question.
They're my favorite.
Okay, so I'm gonna, we're just gonna take some notes on what you bring up. So first we need to clarify, I guess, how would you summarize what type of groups? Is that essentially what you're asking here?
Yeah, are you looking at, do you want to figure out if it's like individual groups that are successful, types of groups that are successful, or just the overall product Facebook groups? What exactly are you talking about here?
Okay, as an interviewer, I'm gonna say just overall Facebook groups in general.
So if you're looking at overall Facebook groups in general, you can see the number of unique visitors to each group. You could see the number of visits per day per unique visitor. You could look at the number of posts per unique visitor, the number of likes, or whatever their newest emojis are per user per day, just to see how much people are actually interacting with each other.
Okay. wasn't able to type fast enough for each of those points, but yep. Exactly.
I would say also the rate of activity, if it's increasing over time. And like, I guess the number of members increasing versus the number of members interacting or liking or commenting or posting.
I think I'd also want to see the number of unique groups that individual users are members of.
Unique groups that
Right. So like me, if you were to look at, user A belongs to 5 groups, user B belongs to 15 groups, do we have a lot of multiple groups, or do we have people that are just one group and that's the only thing that they interact with?
What?
And then how much are those people interacting outside of their groups as well? To give it a comparison and see if the groups are driving more activity.
Okay. And just to probe a little bit for the question, how are we going to measure the success of Facebook groups? So how do we determine what success looks like?
So my understanding is that the entire point of Facebook groups is to get people interacting more. So that's why I would go that way, right? So we're really looking to see how much we're getting more closer connections interacting because we're using smaller groups versus Facebook as a whole. And I guess that because Facebook's reason for being is to sell advertising space, you might want to see if any of those groups are actually clicking on things that were advertised in that group.
Right. Awesome. So you touched on a really good point there, which is that we can't determine success if we don't know what the product is and what the product's aim and goals is. So there's no way to know what success is without knowing what your goal is to begin with. So with that in mind, like you said, product aim, get users to interact with each other, I think is what you said. So I guess that's
and the reason that they want you to interact more is so that you'll see more advertising, and that will hopefully drive things to other.
Okay. Yep. Ads. Does anybody else want to chime in on how they would define the aims or goals of Facebook groups?
Well, I think like if you were to look at a different sort of what's the word, objective, maybe I would want to try to avoid just like insular kind of bubbles or something. So I would try to make sure that each group has the potential to like have like spread to other different groups as well, or like different groups have possible interactions with other groups.
Right. So maybe thinking about exposure, that people aren't just having a newsfeed experience, they're having different experiences and exposed to different areas of the platform, that they're not just seeing their friends and family on Facebook, they're seeing people they would have never met before across the world, across the state, based on some sort of common interest and cross groups. Yeah, cool, okay. So with that in mind, now that we have a sense of what the product is, what the aims of the product is, coming back to the question that the interviewer is asking us, how do we measure the success of Facebook groups? What are, I guess, the different stages of the user experience that we would have to think about to be able to measure the product as a whole? I guess I'm sort of getting at user flow here. What is the user flow of a Facebook group?
Starting from like joining, somebody has to join the group, then they they view messages, they post messages. I'm not sure. What do you mean by user flow?
Exactly.
Well, are they staying in the group?
Yeah,
Is probably the biggest one.
exactly what you described, Jim. So if we just, let's just focus on joining. What are all the different ways that people join a Facebook group?
Right. Were they invited? Was it an advertisement? Was it another friend that just put them in the group?
Or
Which,
maybe
when
they
that
just
happens, it
searched
irritates me.
And what's the word for that when you search something and like organically you found it?
Right. Maybe we just say a search bar. They search maybe a genre, or maybe they search the group specifically.
Or was it suggested in an ad? We get those all the time too.
Yep. Any other ways? You can either be invited by a friend, see it in your newsfeed, whether it be an ad or someone shared it in your newsfeed, search bar. I think they're kind of
Create it yourself.
Yeah, maybe you create a group yourself. Okay. So I guess that's step one of user flow. And then next thing you mentioned, Jim, was like, how are they interacting with the group? So what are some of the different ways people can interact in a group? I guess that's the engagement factor.
You can just read, so like how many messages they read. They can create post messages. How many did they post?
They can like them.
Yeah, like them. How many did they reply to?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of
or share them.
Mm-hmm. You could, you can also friend request people within the group. That's engaging with people in the group as well.
Maybe also if they create like events within the group.
Yep. Events. Yep. So I guess that's, you're joining the group. You have, once you've joined a group, you sort of have the new user experience, and then you're a member of the group. So then what about, how do people come back to a group? You've joined a group. Now, how are people coming back to the group? What's their flow to get back to the group?
Like, are you talking about people who are no longer in the group and they came back? Or are you talking?
Sorry. They're members of the group, they've signed up, but if I've just signed up to a group, what are the mechanisms to encourage me to stay in that, like to keep participating, to return back to the group page?
Right. So how many posts are you seeing in your newsfeed from that specific group? And are you actually clicking on them to go back into the group and interact more?
Yep.
And then I guess you also want to measure how many people leave.
Yep. I was just writing the notifications.
Yeah, no worries.
Sorry. And then, all right, leaving members. So the way to get people to come back to the group page is you're going to get notifications, you're going to see newsfeed stuff. Maybe you get tagged in something and are brought back into the group. What about with the leaving members part? What's their experience of leaving? Is that a deliberate choice, or do you think people are leaving a group actively, or do you think they're just not participating in a group?
It's probably both.
Yeah, sometimes I think you might have like
there might also be
that
people
clicks.
who are.
Oh, sorry. They might click something like "Do not show me posts from this group," and then that's like an active thing that they decided to do.
And then there are also people who get removed from groups by admins. We probably don't want to talk too much about them.
Cool. So I guess now that we've got an understanding of the product, we've got an understanding of the aims of the product, what the product's trying to achieve. we've got an understanding of the user flow. What is the user actually experiencing? These are all the elements of Facebook groups. So then coming back to our question, how do we measure the success of Facebook groups? If now we can probably get a little more specific about our metrics. We want to measure success. It's going to come down to metrics. So does anybody want to throw out, given this sort of flow we've established, what sort of metrics might be good to measure? Because we want to encourage people joining. We want to encourage the interaction. So we need to be able to.
So I think retention rate is going to be one of the biggest things.
And so how are we going to measure retention rate?
It's going to be users who are still active in the group, or at least still a member of the group and are still seeing things in their feed from that group. So even though, like, let's say they're a member, but they said, I don't want to see this anymore, they don't count towards retention because they aren't actively involved.
Yep. Okay, so then maybe we can say like percentage of users who are, that's going to do something good. Percentage of users who are
actively engaging
with posts.
I'll play devil's advocate that maybe retention's not critical. If we really care about, like, the sort of dollar amounts or even just number of views, do we really care if people are leaving after a week? As long as they participate strongly for a week and we have lots of new people coming in, do we care if some people are dropping off after a week?
Right. So what would be the metric that we could use to monitor?
We'd be interested in churn, right? We
Sure,
do
sure.
want to know how many people are coming in and how many people are leaving.
Yep.
We would want to know that, but we might be willing to, I'm thinking a positive valuation of this group could be that there's just a lot of participation, per week or something like that.
Yep. So,
or even growing over time, and maybe churn is not necessarily a negative. So it was those kind of whatever constitutes participation, which might be some linear combination of those other things of, how many you read, how many you post, how many you react to, something like that.
Yeah.
We need some measure of participation based on those elements.
Right. So I guess what
I think you'd probably want to actually divide the group members into total active participants and then measure that churn, right? So are you getting people who have been really active for a week and then they decide this group is not for them? That says something different than if we get a whole bunch of people who are moderately active but continue on with that group for months and months and months, right? Like those are two completely different classes, and which one are you going to say is more, quote, successful? So I would think the people who stay engaged.
So I guess from what I'm hearing from this sort of discussion with success metrics, it kind of sounds like we have sort of three main areas of success to measure. One being activation, that joining phase. Two being engagement, how much are they staying engaged? And three, that sort of retention factor. And so within these, you're going to have your individual metrics, which might be, like percentage of users that join after viewing the group. So they've just viewed the group. How many of those users actually click through and join the group? What's the percentage of users that join after a personal invite? These types of metrics. So out of all these different ways in the joining phase, how can we track how effective these ways are? How can we track and meter how successful the activation stage is of groups? And then I guess within this, all of the things we outlined above in this user flow, we'll have all these success metrics relating to engagement, and that we can track as well. How much are they engaging? And then same for retention. I don't know, what are your thoughts on segmenting it in that way? Because I guess that kind of captures the user flow that we sort of established. Because I don't think one metric's more important than the other. I think it's the culmination of these metrics.
And again, it all depends on what is the reason for this project. Is it just interactions, or is it actually a click-through rate for ads?
Right. And so that's where I think.
So if it's like a click-through rate, then things like, retention don't matter. If you're getting a ton of people new all the time who are clicking on things that are in that group and then they leave, that's fine. We're getting a lot of click-through on the ads. If you have a lot of people who come to the group but don't click on anything other than to talk to each other, then that's not good. So it really depends upon how you're defining the goal of the product.
Totally. And I think if we circle back to this being an interview question, in an interview, perhaps the first question after establishing what the product is, okay, these are some of the aims that I think this product talks about. You might talk about ad revenue, or you might talk about the community building, that kind of stuff. What one would you like me to narrow down on? Because I think, remember, we've got like 15 minutes to answer this question. The interviewer wants to hear some sort of answer. So the interviewer wants to see how much can you dig deeper into discovering the root cause and getting these questions clarified. And so they might give you, okay, I want you to talk about these success metrics with the goal of thinking about making Facebook groups more of a community, or they might say to increase revenue. So I think that's a really good distinguish, because we could rabbit hole on any one of these for hours.
Yeah, and you can make an argument for almost every single one of those metrics depending upon what your end goal is. And they're going to look different depending upon what that end goal is. So
absolutely.
From my experience interviewing people as well as being interviewed, I think the questions you ask are as important as coming up with the answer.
Right.
When I interview somebody, I really want to know that they're thinking about it and what their thought process is. And so if they don't get the right answer exactly, it sort of doesn't matter, as long as they were approaching it in a reasonable way.
yeah, that I was about to say the same thing, that it doesn't really matter if you get to the right engagement. So I've done technical interviews with people as well. And I don't care if you picked the right columns from your SQL table, as long as you could talk me through what you were doing and it made sense and it was logical and it was reasonable. I don't care if you got, the answer of 12 that I wanted.
Yeah. With that in mind, we can keep sort of jumping on this, but I'll just sort of jump to our sort of takeaways. I wrote down some notes. Keyword suggestion solution. There are many ways you could approach this. So these are some of my thoughts that I came through, and we actually touched on most of them. Obviously I guided us in some of those places as well. But when you get a product question like this, I guess the flow you want to establish is establishing what's the product, what are the goals of the product. Then you can get into the more specifics of associating sort of metrics to that, establishing what the user flow is. We sort of spoke about this different types of success metrics. But I guess the takeaway from the question in general, like Jim just said and Amanda just said, the question is deliberately vague. They want to test your ability to investigate a problem and see how you cope with ambiguity, because a lot of business cases have a lot of ambiguity. So that this question is more so designed to see how you cope in an ambiguous situation. So I guess the instinct is to probably jump straight in and start spitting out a bunch of metrics you could touch on, but the opposite is true. To actually dive deeper, how do you investigate a problem? How are you thinking about it? And then, yeah, these questions don't have an answer. So it's more about that approach factor. And does anyone else have experience with this, where they're doing the interview themselves, or like Jim and Amanda said, they've been on the other side as well? Does anyone else have any experiences they want to share in that realm?
If you're interviewing at any type of consulting firm, these are the type of super vague questions that they're going to give you. They give you a lot of those, and they give you a lot of what they call Fermi questions, where they go like, estimate the number of ping pong balls you can put in this 747. There's no answer for it. Nobody is going to be able to give you an actual number. But what they want to know is, are you thinking about it? Are you asking the right questions, right? Like, are you asking, how is this 747 configured? Are we talking about one that has seats? In that case, what type of volume do those seats take up? Because I can't use those for ping pong balls. So they just want to know that you can break it down and think about the individual parts. You're going to use round numbers because you want to be able to do the math in your head and estimate it quickly. So like when they give you one, like estimate the number of windows in the city of Chicago, you'll run into that a lot too. And they want to know, can you define the problem, right? Like I have to figure out how many blocks are in the city, how many buildings are on a block, how tall are those on average, and how many windows per floor do we have? And I'm going to go and, work on it that way. But they're not looking for, well, there's 6 million windows in Chicago. They don't care and they don't know. So just remember that, because if you get flustered on numbers, and I've interviewed enough people that get super flustered when you ask them for, give me the number of manhole covers, that they just start focusing on that number and they can't break it down. But what you want to do is break it down into discrete steps. And that's going to be the more important part.
Yeah. I think helping with that is being very aware of the time. You don't have time to get too specific, so focus on the shell steps. Cool, so this question was an interview query question, and interview query actually has a whole sort of mini series course on how to answer business case and product sense questions, and they give you sort of a little structure to think about and of how to answer these questions. They also have other courses on other types of questions too, and I find them a really good question bank, mostly because their solutions are more in depth, and that can kind of be a tricky thing. I have found a lot of questions to work on, but they often don't have very good solutions or no solutions at all. So Interview Query has a pretty good bank of questions and solutions. But if you're coming across any other good resources for that type of thing, please post it in the Slack. Always want to know. We are pretty much done here for now though, but does anybody have any extra questions or want to circle back to a question or provide me some feedback for the session? This is kind of just an open discussion before you leave. If anyone has anything you want to share or bring to the table.
I thought it was really interesting that you picked the Facebook groups question. I watched the Social Dilemma. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but it was like really interesting how like the very objectives that they set up, like making people like interact and like things and react, made it so like people were more divided than ever, because like they would post like inflammatory stuff, and or I don't know, inflammatory posts would get like a lot of reactions, and then people would just have such a narrow mindset, and like their version of the truth would be only what they saw in a certain group. Yeah.
And those groups are self-reinforcing, right? Like if you belong to a political group, you're only getting that specific, political view on what's going on. And so you start to think that this other view is just crazy. Like it doesn't even make sense to you anymore because you've been in that bubble for so long. And it works the same way with things like, cable news. Are you watching MSNBC or are you watching Fox News? And that's going to give you like they're not necessarily two sides of the same coin, I would argue, but they do both kind of reinforce those views that you already have. And my background's in psychology, so I can tell you just how much fun that is for people. But it is addicting, like, because you're constantly being reinforced that, yes, you are correct. You're right. You're right. You're right. You know what you're talking about. They don't. And it just becomes like this vicious cycle, and you get more and more kind of entrenched in that world.
Oh, that's interesting. So did you like work in psychology for a bit and then transfer to like technical fields, or how did you get into like data science?
So So my degree is a science degree in psychology, and there is a whole lot of data and statistics when you're doing any social science degree. So they're not at all separate, which
Okay.
a lot of people seem to think if you don't have like a, physics or chemistry degree that you didn't actually do like hardcore sciences and math, but I did hardcore sciences and math. I just applied it to people's brains.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, I
there's
didn't mean
a
to like
whole lot-
imply like you're not part of.
No, not at all.
this
I mean,
world.
I run into that a lot. People are like, "Oh, how did you end up doing this?" But the other thing that you find with like social science degrees, statistics and survey design and study design and research design are kind of the major foundational building blocks of those social science programs. And those are also the major foundational building blocks for data science. So they,
I'd agree.
even though they don't seem related, they are.
Last week we did for anyone who wasn't here, we did an experimental design question. It was sort of like a A/B testing one, and it was coming back to those basics of where did your data come from, how big is it, how are you what are your sampling methods, all of those sort of 101 science class things that are really easy to skip over and assume knowledge on, but it's the only way to test. Do you know the 101s?
Yeah, that's
Foundational study design is foundational study design, and it doesn't really change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I have a math background. I like studied pure math, and like we get the impression like we're equipped to tackle any sort of like question in the real world, but yeah, I wouldn't know, for instance, if I hadn't like watched The Social Dilemma or something, that there's these blind spots that I don't know about. So it's like really necessary to kind of like look at social science, like, I don't know, read
Honestly, every social science is applied mathematics, right? Like we just apply it to a different theory. We apply it to a theory of the brain and how you grew up and what your process and thinking is, but it's still applied mathematics because you're still using all of that computational stuff to come up with what you feel is going on and how you think these interventions might be able to help. So yeah, you have the building blocks. It's just the theory that we're using in psychology is probably a little bit different than what they would use in political science or sociology or chemistry. But the math underlying it is the same.
Mm-hmm.
At least from my experience. And music is like that too, honestly, because music is all math, whether you want to believe it or not. My nephew still doesn't believe me that music is nothing but math, and he keeps saying he doesn't want to study math because he loves music, and I keep telling him that they are the same thing.
Hey, I had a question. Like on technical interviews, I haven't done one yet, but do they give you like feedback on whether you got something right or wrong, or is it kind of just?
I think it depends on the company.
It definitely depends on your interviewer.
Yeah, I reckon you could, if you have a recruiter that you're working with, hound them a bit. You can try following up with emails, but one I did, I couldn't get any bit of feedback.
And a lot of times they don't necessarily give the feedback to the recruiter. They just say, we're going to pass. And so even if and honestly, not one recruiter ever asked me why I was passing on somebody after we did a SQL technical interview, right?
Yeah.
Like they just assumed we decided that they didn't know SQL.
One thing to note, if you
which usually wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So.
One thing to note, Chum, if you for the big tech, more established companies, your Amazons, Googles, that kind of stuff, they have a pretty defined, structured process, and your recruiter is going to work really closely with you to actually provide questions to you. Not questions, present topics, and they want you to be successful. It's their job for you to be successful, so they make sure that you have the resources to prepare. Smaller companies probably don't have that build out as much, but yeah, technically you can get a little more from bigger companies, I find. But
remember that recruiters are evaluated on the number of successful placements they have. So if they're bringing, even if they're an internal recruiter and they bring 100 applicants in, and not one is hired, they're not doing their job. So like Liana said, it is in their best interest to see you succeed.
Yeah.
So they're going to help you through it.
How did you like the questions today, guys? I'll let you go soon. I don't want to keep you too long, but any feedback for me on the session in general or the questions themselves?
I think these were really helpful. Like, I thought, so I had done some HackerRank practice before, but yeah, I didn't like discuss them with anybody, and it wasn't under a time constraint. So yeah, I found this one like kind of challenging, but yeah, it was like good. Now I know what to work on.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think the format is very good to get a mix of kind of the hands-on technical and the a little bit less well-defined questions. So the mix of three is a nice approach.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, cool. Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I'll let you go. It's Tuesday evening for most of you, so I'll let you get dinner on the go. Thank you again to Svetlana for bringing a question. Really appreciate that, for you talking us through that. That was a really, really good question. And please join in on Slack, post any resources that you come across, and I'll be sharing the slides and solutions to today's questions in the Slack channel. I think I have recorded the session today. Yes, it looks like I have. So if all goes well with retrieving the video, I will share that also. Cool. Well, thanks for coming, everyone, and keep in touch. I'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Svetlana.
Good night.
Good night. Sleep tight.